I didn't start talking about porn in front of an audience.
Mhm.
I spoke about it first in therapy and then in 12-step groups, and slowly got more and more comfortable, then with family, then with friends, and eventually got to the point where I felt solid within myself that I wasn't worried about any reaction I was going to get.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Mislaibeled. We are here with a very, very special guest in Miami Beach, or like Miramar, I think this is the precise location?
Davey.
Okay, we're in Davey. Actually, freaking gorgeous area of Miami that I didn't even know existed. But a couple quick things before we get to our guest. Number one, if you are enjoying our content, please like, subscribe, and comment. We are putting in a lot of work, as I say, every single episode. So again, if you're enjoying and you could give back, it'd be greatly appreciated. Like, subscribe, comment. Second of all, episode is sponsored by E&A Tax Advisors. E&A Tax Advisors is a tax strategy company, helps you limit your tax liability by looking at your finances and strategizing it to make sure that you are saving the most money on your taxes for 1099 people and self-employed people. It's for the big boys like our guest, the one and only Eli Nash. How you doing?
How's everything?
I'm good.
I don't know why I had to comment on my belly so.
Oh yeah, so quick.
What was that?
Nice.
I'm just.
That's what you're saying.
You'll watch the replay.
I got you. No, I was just thinking you're in business and you might qualify for this, tax strategy program. So,
Speaking about the you have a beautiful home. Beautiful. I've never been in this part of Miami. Something I noticed about your community, y'all have moats.
What's a moat?
A moat is like in the olden days. There was like a castle. There was water surrounding the house.
Oh right. So here
You just have like a moat. Like there's like alligators in it. Like
Florida is a moat.
this is crazy.
Miami
but
is
he happens to get into any property here. He's saying that you got
There's a bridge.
No, I know that.
bridge.
Yeah.
To stop
Yeah,
about.
and this one here they do indeed.
It's pretty cool to cross a bridge to get to someone's house. I like it.
We're
good
prepared for an Armageddon. That's why most
100%.
Floridians live here.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Talk about Florida versus the West.
Oh, I thought it was just because it was a tax haven. My bad. Sorry.
Anyways, okay, for the people that are not here that have no idea what we're talking about, we're going to get down to business so they could get a good conversation here. So, Ellie, I want to just start off by getting an understanding. First, let's just start early from the beginning. Where are you from?
Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Crown Heights, Brooklyn. You grew up there as a little kid?
Yeah, I grew up there, lived in the same house my whole life. My parents still live there.
Cool. So when did you come down here?
I came down here in 2005. I was studying smicha, actually, in the Shul of Bal Harbor.
Oh, really? Wow. How old were you at the time?
19.
Wow. So you were like typical run-of-the-mill road Chabad?
I never like to consider myself run-of-the-mill, but I guess so, yeah.
Okay, cool. Wow, that's really amazing. So you come here. I mean, I know that we have a lot of questions, obviously. First of all, we're big advocates in general for mental health. As you know, we've had on a variety of different mental health professionals. You obviously, you're clear about your mission, which is spreading awareness regarding porn addiction. And we actually just had on someone,
Dr. Tepfer.
Dr. Tepfer, who honestly, people love that episode. It was really interesting. You actually even messaged me about it, that you liked it.
I enjoyed it very much. I thought
Yeah.
you did a great job, yeah.
So I wanted to get right into that. From your perspective, what do you see as the difference between, and if you could just identify the difference between someone who is a porn addict and someone who, like myself, let's just be real, who's watched porn in their life, or even someone who watches porn here and there, or even weekly, let's say. Is there a difference between an addict and someone like that?
Yeah, of course there's a difference. The difference is in the treatment, right? And the real way you know. As a matter of fact, just coming up here, I had a phone call from someone who, he's young, right, under 21, who's struggling with porn. I asked a few questions. It didn't sound like a debilitating addiction. So I said, hey, check out Guard Your Eyes and see if something like that will work. And if it doesn't, call me back in a month and let's see, maybe we'll throw some bigger stuff at it.
Interesting. And that would be your suggestion to someone. There's a lot of people out there that watch porn, right, weekly, a couple times a week, that do want to stop, but they find it very difficult to stop. Your first suggestion to them would be
Guard Your Eyes.
Guard Your Eyes. And what exactly is Guard Your Eyes?
Guard Your Eyes is more for a Jewish audience, but Guard Your Eyes is a nice, it's more of a software community that's built to help people who are struggling with porn. Where I find, like for myself, Guard Your Eyes wouldn't have been enough. I needed much more. I needed therapy. I needed 12-step meetings. I needed to really get under the hood. But for someone who's, like you described, something like Guard Your Eyes or a Covenant Eyes, more in the Christian community, could help.
What's happening in a person like you when it goes to the level of addiction where something like Guard Your Eyes is not enough?
The best description I saw was a book by Lance Dodds, who's happens to be anti-12 step, but I liked his book anyway. And he described it as, imagine someone is trapped under a rock, their arm is trapped under a rock, and they're cutting their arm off. So you look at it and you say, what are you doing? So I'm saving my life. So it's kind of like that, is some people are watching porn to save their life.
Because it's the only way they know how to cope.
Yeah, usually it started at a young age. And it very much was that, a life-saving tool that someone used.
When you say life-saving, you mean in terms of the fact that it's what they are using to self-soothe?
Yeah, but it could be stronger than self-soothes. For some people, it actually be the difference between life and death.
You think that watching porn, is stopping some people from committing suicide?
I primarily talk from personal experience. I never had suicidal thoughts or ideations or anything else, but I don't know how I would have made it through my teenage years without porn.
What's interesting, I was, and recently I was, I'm a big therapy guy. I've been doing it for 11 years. It's hard to tell, I know. I haven't really got so far. But recently, though, I was in therapy, and I was actually discussing with my therapist a certain habit that I have that's not a healthy one. It's not porn. It's totally different. And
Tax fraud.
Tax fraud. and he was saying, and I was kind of like shameful about it. And he actually responded to me. He's like, you have to look at this for what it is. This is a coping mechanism that has allowed you to live your life and get to where you are. Like you're looking at, he's like, it's actually a very, it's maladaptive, but it's actually very creative. And you should actually be, it's quite impressive that this is what you took on in order to get yourself there versus a lot of other things that I, in theory, could have maybe chosen drugs and all those other things.
Right. You're intentionally not talking about it.
The specific thing?
Yes.
Correct. Yes. I'm specifically not talking about this specific thing. Yes.
Okay. I just wasn't sure.
No, I'm not comfortable being vulnerable enough to share this specific thing. Correct.
Now, did you ask that?
You're not on my podcast, so it's fine.
Yeah, I was going to say that right there, what just happened right there seems to be very, in part from what I've been researching about you, your whole thing is speak it out. Your whole thing is let's get rid of the shame. Let's start to build that community. You need to be able to say it and say it out loud to an accepting audience.
Yeah, very, very often. I don't want to pretend.
I'm not ragging on labels. I'm saying that is that
right. I don't want to pretend that everyone should say it in the way I'm saying it.
Mhm.
But if I was being completely true to the title of the TED Talk I did, it wouldn't have been called Escaping Porn Addiction. It would have been something about destroying shame or getting over shame.
Yeah,
because that's really what it's about. Is how do we overcome shame? I think it's the most debilitating anything in our society.
You think shame is behind more than just porn addiction?
Of course, yeah.
All addictions. It's behind most addictions. All
it's
addictions.
behind every addiction. You say it's the catalyst for all addiction.
But more than addictions, it's behind most mental health issues.
And you think this is obviously you're talking not just about religious people, Orthodox Jews, other religions. You're talking about human beings in 2023 in society.
Yeah, probably
since the
beginning of history.
Yeah.
Right when the story of Adam and Eve, the very first thing after eating the tree of knowledge,
They felt ashamed.
He felt ashamed. He covered himself with a fig leaf. Right? Mm-hmm. Is that feeling of shame? That's what erodes us. There's shameless, which is also no good.
Right. I thought you were talking about the show for a second. No, I literally thought you were saying that, like making a joke.
No, meaning I'm not recommending being shameless.
Right. But there's a healthy medium.
We're all wearing shirts. We're all dressed appropriately for this. Yeah, I think that's good. But if someone is holding on to something you saw it. You saw it when there's something that's eating at label, right? He just said it, right? You saw it.
So it is, but it's not. My people, this is what I wanted to get to.
We caught it on camera.
No, it's on camera. We're going to keep it. We're going to keep it. I'm talking to the camera, to everyone watching this. It is, but it's not. I don't have shame around it. Just the fact that I won't share with the entire world. Brene, I saw you quote her on something I was listening to. She talks all the time about oversharing. All the time.
100%.
So I personally think in my personal situation right now, that would be oversharing if I shared that with the whole world.
Label. It's just
and you
may
be correct for this format.
Huh?
You may be correct for this format.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. But there's something in between. I didn't start talking about porn in front of an audience. Mm-hmm. I spoke about it first in therapy and then in 12-step groups and slowly got more and more comfortable, then with family, then with friends. And eventually got to the point where I felt solid within myself that I wasn't worried about any reaction I was going to get. And that's when I got up in front of a stage. And
right. Yeah. I mean,
I wasn't actually serious that you should get up.
No, it's fine. It happens to be. It's not like a private thing. It's something he knows about. It's not like my friends know about it.
It's tax fraud. He just does a lot of tax fraud.
I'm a huge tax fraud guy. Like that's why I sponsor my tax fraud agent.
Are you aware of the concept of like men's circles?
Yes.
Do you have thoughts on that opinion? Do you want to see those inculcated more in society. They're not very popular. They're not well known. I don't know of one.
You don't know of a men's circle?
That might be it. That might be my issue, but
Right.
I would like to start one. But
do you mean specifically men or?
I mean specifically
circles?
men.
Specifically
Because
men.
there are certain issues that men do not want to open up in front of women. Having women in that circle would actually be detrimental, especially if it's around men. It's something that will make the men feel weak or less masculine.
Right. I was invited to a men's circle.
Can you explain for everyone that doesn't know, including myself, what a men's circle is?
Please.
It's just a group of men who come together and agree to be honest and open about the things going on in their lives. And different ones have different rules, whether they have meeting frequency or topics that they address or things they may do together. So they may choose to, I don't know, rally around some sort of physical fitness. And but beside for the physical fitness, they're also allowing for real honest conversation to go on, a sort of brotherhood where I got your back, you got my back.
And is that significantly different than 12 steps?
Yeah, well, that's what he's saying, right? It's significantly different than 12 steps in that it's men can talk about issues that are only, there's only men in the room. You can talk in a different way.
Oh, got it.
At the end of the day, men will behave a little bit different. And also, it's just a way also just to popularize for men the idea of going somewhere to talk about what's really going on. And also, honestly, there's another aspect that I was just thinking about, which is in some ways, men find it much easier sometimes to open up in front of women. Like, ask any girl, her boyfriend, she's all of them automatically, she's his therapist. But it would be nice to make it more to normalize men opening up about their feelings to other men, which we don't do enough of in society.
I hear it. If you want, I can certainly introduce you afterwards to the person who introduced me to this men's group. But I did do a weekend that was for men's only, like a men's only workshop. And it was interesting in terms of some of the exercises that they did. We could have never got away with.
If there were women there?
If there were women there, yeah.
Okay, that sounds kind of, when you put it that way. Like,
not that there weren't women there. When I say there were women, facilitators or opening doors or stuff like that.
But if there were women also
around.
sharing, then it wouldn't.
But yeah, it was just men. So
and I think women should also have their own. So like there should
100%.
be groups together and groups separate.
Right. I think what you're saying
There's a natural insecurity around women that you're not going to be able to get over at the end of the day.
Right. And women do that also.
Yeah.
But women probably naturally have that.
Yes.
Where they'll go to dinner and talk.
I think a woman's book club turns probably into a women's circle, but very rarely does a football game turn into, no, dude, guys, we should talk about this.
Right.
Bro, grab me a beer, dude.
I've never ever heard someone open up about their porn addiction while playing like Call of Duty with the boys, Racism I've heard. I haven't heard.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a lot of the reason I talk was from that. What I saw in the 12-step meetings, I'm like, this is so freaking awesome to have a place where we can just talk and unburden ourselves from what's going on. Why is this so different than every day? So I thought, hey, maybe if I can create some of that out there. There were times people would call me and they needed help. And I'm like, what addiction do you have? I'm like, I don't have an addiction. I was like, I don't have a recommendation. You got to find some excuse, make up an addiction and walk into a 12-step meeting.
This is something Sonny Perlman said. We talked with Sonny Perlman. He runs one of the biggest teens at risk centers in Brooklyn. And, he's literally sometimes like a last stop with these kids with just being fully on the street or at risk of losing their lives to drugs. But he said the worst cases are the kids that come in and it's like, they don't have a drug problem. It's like, oh, fuck, I can't help you. You need to get on drugs. Because then there's a program. Then I know what to do with you.
Right. I don't feel that way today, but I understand where he's coming from.
No, he also says it, and I don't want to take away his words. It's probably good if you listen. I'm not sure. Again, I know.
I may have completely just misrepresented it.
I know what Zach is saying and what he's referring to. There might have just been a little bit more nuanced than the way Sonny said it. We should definitely send him.
Sonny, if case that was just happened, I'm so sorry.
So you're basically saying that I was actually wondering this because I know people, right, that don't have addictions per se, but they just can't get their life together. And for whatever given reason, you suggest they just walk into a 12-step. Life is just chaotic. They've been trying out of 10 years. For whatever reason, it just ain't working.
I couldn't give blanket recommendations. I'm saying there was a time where early on when I came into 12 steps, they talk about a pink cloud at the beginning of 12 steps that you feel like you've just found Jesus. Eventually you find out that, it's not perfect, but there's a lot of value there. Early stages, 12 steps, I just felt like everyone should be in this, in this place. And when I would talk to someone and they were struggling, I would almost want to look for an addiction to direct them there. Today,
Right.
no, I think there's more tools in the toolbox, but I don't have a one size fits all. I couldn't sit and give a recommendation.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there is no one size fits all in life in general. But it's funny. I know people on 12 steps that are like you are just diehard. The real 12 steppers are just like they just swear by it. It's just the next level.
I know right now I'm not a 12 stepper.
Nah,
Today I'm not. I have not. COVID messed up my whole routine.
no, I get that. But are you still a fan of 12 steps?
I'm still a fan of 12
Just not
steps,
doing
but
it,
I
yeah.
haven't been in a meeting in a while.
Right. I know
Wow.
people. And the
But
Zoom
it saved
I
my
did-
life.
Right.
He straight up saved your life.
Should I save my life?
Wow.
Yeah, shout out. To
So,
the
and when I
12
say, when I use that language, I don't mean my physical life.
your
Like I
mental,
probably would have
emotional-
been.
right, your mental emotional life.
Yeah.
I could say that some people live lives that are almost as bad as suicide. Like there's
Most people.
that is an interesting thing to say. You
Most
think most people are living that sort of quiet desperation?
Who is that one who, where's the quote from? Most men live lives of quiet desperation.
That's
Yeah.
kind of what I was paraphrasing, but I don't remember
Yeah.
who said it. Let's just say it's
Yeah.
Churchill. He said all of them.
I think it is. Yeah. I think
What do you mean by quiet desperation? Let's just get into that. They're just unhappy. You're saying at the end of the day, like
miserable.
Yeah, more than
miserable.
unhappy.
Why do you think they're miserable?
I think in today's day and age, most people are walking around with an addiction. Most people are walking around struggling heavily. Think about the percentage of people who are medicated, the percentage of people who are either medicating with medicine, like
Or drugs.
pharmaceuticals, or drugs,
Recreational.
alcohol, porn, all of those things. It's
Why do you
50, 60,
Why do you think
70%.
that? You think that's different today than it was? I don't know, 100 years ago.
Yeah,
Why?
community.
Community. This is exactly
This
what Sonny
is-
Perlman said.
Okay.
Explain
Yeah.
community. So explain that to me. Expound, if you will.
It's very connected to what we're talking about. So it's a sense of belonging, but a place where I can be real.
And
If I have to put on a mask to show up, then I never feel accepted. And to soothe that, then I have to do many other things.
and you think soothing that, doing many other things, how does that soothe that in your opinion?
Temporarily. It
By
feels-
just taking you out of the pain.
sometimes it distracts you, sometimes it numbs you. Yeah. One or the other.
I can't help but wonder, have there been times in your life when you felt like you were repeatedly being asked to show up with a mask on? And I am thinking about your childhood in Crown
COVID.
Heights. Very good. And COVID.
You serve that up on a but go ahead.
Hot platter. No,
I made for you New Yorkers. We didn't have to wear masks.
yeah, but you didn't hear COVID didn't happen here.
Like 6 months.
Well, listen, I lived in Crown Heights during COVID. It didn't happen there either. COVID was it was happening elsewhere.
It's funny because we were actually just with Anthony Scaramucci and he was talking about COVID and he was like saying how he's in favor of the vaccines and he's like to us, so you guys obviously didn't take them in the Orthodox community. We know that. I said, what are you talking about? We have cards. I have a card.
He's like,
"You have
sure,
a
you
card?"
got a fake.
He's like, yeah, you made it up on your computer. I'm like, yeah.
No, but yeah, for real, like, do you think that in your life you've been asked to show up many times with a mask?
Religiously, I definitely felt that growing up, for sure. Yeah, there was a certain expectation of the way we'd perform or what we would say or what we thought about, what we cared about. I certainly felt that way. And then in business, I felt a similar pressure. There was, I've been in business, but over the last 10 years, I wouldn't say it's been my primary focus. I went to sleep at night more worried about healing, addiction, and other things than pure business. But a lot of the guys I started my business career with or surrounded myself with early on, yeah, that was the approach. Like, what are you doing this other stuff for? You got to be this way. It felt like in those circles, if I wasn't that way, there was some explanation that I had to give for
Could
it.
you explain if you weren't which way?
Business first, head down. This is what we're doing.
Sigma grind set.
Whatever it is,
Yeah.
I want to say hustle culture, but
Yeah.
I've had.
Was it so again? I'm actually curious about this. This is relevant to me, so I'm curious. You're saying that you felt like the people you were around were business first, and therefore you couldn't be yourself as far as what just your full self, your emotional self, as well as your business acumen couldn't coexist around them because they would kind of like shit on you for having that emotional side?
So let's say these interests, right? Like even this
Mhm.
podcasts that are outside of the pure what you'd expect from someone just in the business grind and just the more money we make, the better.
Right.
That could feel alienating, not accepting in that. It
Wow.
did. It actually did. I mean, I had to
So much-
find a different group of friends. Fast forward now, and that's why I say many people live lives of quiet desperation, is a lot of the same people who I felt heavily judged by when I made these decisions to focus on recovery or other things. They've at some point turned back around to me for questions around my own healing journey. Hey, maybe there was something you were onto, and it's not all about the money and everything else. But I felt like I had to wear a mask in those settings for quite a while. Yeah.
And you feel like in the 12-step program or in these sorts of programs, they really fully accept you, the whole you, including the messy parts?
Yes and no. It's a good question you asked. I felt fully accepted right up until psychedelics. If you want the honest question, I never said that.
No,
anywhere, but if
please.
you want
So
the-
please explain.
Please
want
speak
the
on
honest
that.
question.
Please.
First of all, which psychedelics have you done?
Which haven't I? So first of all, I should say that even though I was a sex addict and addicted to many of pornography, prostitutes, massage parlors, strip clubs, like all of that, one of the ways that I was able to live in denial for as long as I was around this was that I didn't have other vices, such as the standard gambling, drugs, alcohol, and things like that. So I'm not someone who tried everything before. I was very against it. But as part of my healing journey, and specifically following Gabor Mate closely and him talking about ayahuasca, I said, hey, if this guy who I respect, who I've been following, has said that ayahuasca is the #1 treatment for addicts, I have to pay attention. So I went that route. And as I did, I felt less acceptance within the 12-step community.
That's very surprising.
And I wasn't part of a program that was drugs or alcohol, which you'd expected in that program, right? Because this is a mind-altering substance. So they'd say, okay, ayahuasca is a mind-altering substance. So is heroin. Everything is bad. This is considered relapse. That's not the case. I'd go with we call them fellows, right? Friends in 12 steps. We would go and have beers together or wine.
Because it's not an alcohol.
That wasn't our
Anonymous.
100%. But as I started moving more into plant medicines and the healing from there, I noticed there was much less acceptance around that. Like, for example, if I wanted to talk about the fact that I relapsed the day before, I hired a prostitute and I went through all the gory details, I would have got only understanding and appreciation. If I spoke about the healing that I received from an ayahuasca journey, I mean, the first time I started talking about it a little bit, I felt the
shift.
Yeah, not here.
Why is that?
It could be a couple of reasons. Number one is there is some resistance if you start bringing in outside stuff in general, right? There is that. So, for example, you'll get that feeling if anyone, doesn't matter, you can have 50 Trump supporters in a meeting and you say something pro-Trump, everyone's going to give you a look. Don't bring politics into 12-step meetings. A certain sacredness in there, which I appreciate. And the same will be on the opposite, which is amazing.
Should implement that with sports.
They should. Also incredible.
Different discussion, different time.
Right. So that's one of the traditions in the 12 steps is to keep outside issues out. That being said, I don't know that this is an outside issue.
Right.
Is it an outside issue that someone has found healing? Like myself, I found healing in ways that I didn't find through the 12 steps. 12 steps saved my life, but ayahuasca did something that 12 steps didn't.
Could you talk about that healing with ayahuasca? First of all, could you tell me about the experience, soup to nuts ayahuasca?
What do you mean the experience?
Where did you do it, first of all? Here?
Costa Rica.
You went to Costa Rica.
That's where you're kind of supposed to.
You had like a shaman and all that?
Yeah.
And how long, what is it? You drink something?
Ayahuasca is made up of two plants. One is a vine, one is a plant.
Okay.
The vine itself is called ayahuasca. What it does is it shuts down your body's natural, in your stomach, I believe there's an enzyme that breaks down DMT. DMT is naturally produced in our bodies, and it's also in nature a lot. So in a lot of plants, there's DMT.
Okay.
You're familiar with DMT?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've never tried it, but I'm familiar.
Okay, so DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. If you just took the DMT, which usually they use a leaf called the chacruna leaf, which my understanding is has the highest concentration of DMT in any plant, if you just took that, the enzyme in your stomach would break it down, you wouldn't feel it. So they combine that in a tea, cook it for hours. They have a special way of making it. And when you take that together, that enzyme is inhibited from breaking down the DMT, and then the DMT can have an effect. So one or the other wouldn't do anything. Together, they have its effect.
Got it. And it's an hallucination. type
You're very
experience?
much there. Yeah, you could hallucinate. You could see things. Most times that was not my experience.
How many times have you done it?
Several, probably 10 or so.
10. Got it.
And I'd say twice I remember strong hallucinations. For the most part, no, it was more of awarenesses. You're very, very present. You know what's going on in the room, but there's a sense that there's a knowingness that comes over you and a clarity around a lot of areas. Like,
Wow. And
but it can come in many different ways. There are times the worst panic attack of my life was on ayahuasca.
So that's what I'm asking. Like I've read a couple places, and I'm not saying by any means that this is the majority of the cases, but I've read that people sometimes have severe depression afterwards. Is that accurate? Like sometimes there's negative effects.
Yes, certainly it can bring things up. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, these are not, it's healing, right? You can go to a therapist and have a very intense session,
Right.
and afterwards emotions could be open and you could be raw and you can feel sad. I mean,
Right.
I felt intense anger probably for 4 to 6 weeks,
How long does each session last for?
roughly 6 hours.
6 hours. And you're throwing up? Like what's the...
I've never thrown up on ayahuasca. Many people do. Some people do it earlier on in the process as they get more familiar and comfortable with it.
Oh.
Maybe less so.
Let me ask you something, Eli.
But that can happen tomorrow. I'm saying that can happen at any point in time that I could throw up.
Who got you to start? Oh, because the Gabor Mate.
Gabor mate.
Got it.
What would you say to people who think that ayahuasca is a shortcut and that really therapy and working on yourself is the way to go and it's the only way to go to have lasting change, and ayahuasca and mushrooms and ketamine therapy and all these other things are merely shortcuts and they will not last, which is something I've heard over and over and over again, but not from experts and not even from people who have tried it. That's just the fear.
So from 2008, I started this process and I never let up. 2008, I started therapy. 2013, I started 12 steps. In therapy, I dealt mostly with child sex abuse, so pretty intense things. And in 12 steps, porn addiction, sex addiction, and everything related to that. My first ayahuasca experience was 12 or 13 years into my healing journey. So if it's a shortcut, I mean, how much more do you want me to deal with things than 12 or 13 years?
Right.
Than that. So I don't know what to say. I don't know exactly what to say to that. It's a shortcut. I also, the other side of that is, let's say someone's just starting out in their process. And I'm not saying it's for everyone. I think there are qualifications and there are times that it's appropriate to do it and people who are appropriate for it, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going into we're not having a full scale discussion about ayahuasca because that's all it'll be. However, I'm also not saying that someone should wait 12 or 13 years
To do it.
to do it, because let's say it is a shortcut. I took a car to get here. You got a car. You came with a car too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got screwed up by the internet. Is that not a shortcut? I got sexually abused as a child. Is that not a shortcut?
It's a shortcut to pain.
Right. Exactly. So if it works, what's the difference? And might I need it once a year? I have no idea. Like, in order to sustain this feeling I feel today, might I need it once a year? Yeah. Okay. So what? And what's wrong with that?
Could you describe
There are
the
many
feeling
things.
that you referred to that you feel today post doing this?
You feel alive. You feel cleaned on the inside.
It's a sense of clarity type of thing?
It's more than clarity.
You say a clean.
Peace?
Clean. What does it mean,
Peace,
clean?
Peace. Serenity.
Freedom. Peace, freedom.
Really?
Serenity, yeah. Deep freedom.
Where does that freedom come from, you think? Just the clarity around what is actually going on, that is the seeing how clear what the issues were?
I think it's who we are. It's who we are, and the system gets muddied up.
Clogged.
Right? A baby doesn't need any of this.
Right.
A baby is wide open and happy and free, and even if it cries for a little bit,
Right.
can be laughing in the same breath. Not even a baby, even a child a couple years old, and eventually the water gets muddy, and then our mind starts interpreting what this is. We usually project it onto ourselves. I am wrong. I am bad. I am this. I am that. We strip the world of its meaning. We just think we randomly had a shit ton of bad luck.
Yeah.
And eventually that's cleared out, and you go back to that state.
You feel like it's lasted.
It's been a few years, yeah.
You really feel like a different person.
Completely different person.
I think one of the things is that people, I think, just find it almost too good to be true.
No, most of the people, honestly, that have opinions about this are not the ones who have tried it. That's
100%.
a big factor to this.
But I think there's fear there. And when there's fear coupled with this idea of it's really going to help, these are people who are in pain.
So let's quantify it. There is work that is necessary outside of the ayahuasca session. it'll give me some information. And I'll give you one example, which may or may not be meaningful to everyone. What's cool about ayahuasca is if you talk to people, everyone has such a unique experience. So it's almost like it talks in the language that would resonate with that person, which is pretty wild. So one of my first experiences, I had a vision of my wife and I, like connected, complete trust, complete, a bond that felt like one. If I was describing it in a different setting, I may say I saw our souls connected. No, I saw our souls connected. I saw our souls as one, right? Which is a Jewish concept. And later on through ayahuasca, it showed me some of the issues in my relationship that I have to face. So now I had two things. The awareness of some very real things that I was doing in my relationship that wasn't working, and also seeing what was possible through this relationship. Almost, I don't want to say I saw the future, but I saw the possibility of the future. And those two things have combined to force me to lean in to my relationship in a way that I had not and would not have previously. And I had no model for it. There's no 12-step meetings that support. There's nothing for that. I don't see it anywhere. It's just something that I've had to kind of chart my own course. And ayahuasca showed me both the possibility and the problem.
Wow.
But now it's doing the work.
That's so well said. No, I'll be honest. I've spoken to a lot of people about this, including myself. I've been contemplating, especially lately, the last 6 months, the more people we speak to about this, and it's becoming in the last year, the new in thing, obviously, ayahuasca. No one really knew what it was 3-4 years ago. Now it's obviously being talked about a lot, but I've been thinking about doing it. And I know other people have also, and a lot of people are scared, including myself. Like, I don't know, just about the experience. You don't know what you don't know. Well, and what would you advise to someone like myself and all the others that are in my camp? See how vulnerably I'm talking right now and sharing to the world?
Listen, if you're not scared, I am for you. So
what do you mean by that?
There's something scary. Yeah, it is scary. It actually is scary. When I say I had the worst panic attack in my life, like it strips you naked. You're going to see the truth, and the truth can be scary. So
but is that truth?
If I was, the next time I do ayahuasca, I will be very scared going in. And it's the appropriate posture, meaning that's not what you're trying to get to. I'm not going to relax everyone's fear around this. This is something very serious you're going into, but it's not a drug. It's not alcohol. That's not what's happening.
Right.
It's very spiritual, and it connects you to a truth that's in an experiential way that's hard to shake. And I think that maybe that's what it is now, with the amount of shit so many of us have experienced, whether it's abuse or whether it's raised by people who've survived the Holocaust. We've just experienced a lot. If we don't have direct experiences of spirituality, it's going to be hard to believe. And that's what this gives. It very truly gives you a direct experience of spirituality.
Interesting. Did you get more into God because of ayahuasca? Did that make you closer religiously in any sense, or just from a spiritual perspective?
Well, just to clarify, you were not wearing kippah in your media a certain amount of years ago, and now you do. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that journey, and did ayahuasca and all these things play a part in that?
It's hard for me to say no because it happened afterwards. So since I started wearing a kippah after ayahuasca, I have to attribute it to it because it's influenced a lot of my decisions. In terms of wearing the kippah, a lot of it was anti-Semitism based, and I saw what was going on, and there were a few mentions. I actually have a podcast I released a week or two ago, Why I Wear a Kippah. And I spoke about that. And I spoke about seeing anti-Semitism. And my mom's family is from Morocco and my mom is from Morocco and her family today lives in France. And whenever I went there was this mention to, hey, chill out. Like, don't wear the kippah, wear a cap. We're not wearing the fringes hanging out. Like, we got to be in France. We're not so public about the fact that we're Jewish. And this was growing up as a kid, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And then seeing how some of that language started coming to America. And I said, hey, let me wear something. So it started on occasion here or there. And it gets to the point now that if I'm not wearing it, I feel odd.
That sounds like it's less of
a... quick question. I want to jump topics for a second because I think it's a very important one to get to. Obviously, you're very open about the fact that you were sexually abused as a kid. Could you just, for starters, to someone that has not been sexually abused as a kid, and I still think majority of people have not been, even though the numbers are obviously staggering for those who have been way higher than it should be. Could you explain what happens to a child just in simple layman terms, when they are sexually abused?
Right. So, in and of itself, sexual abuse doesn't have to be that damaging. In and of itself, meaning, I know it's a strong statement, but if I looked at the event of the abuse, the first time it happened, let's say, for me it was continuous over a 3 or so year period, but the first time it happened, had I gone to a parent, had I felt trusting enough to go to a parent, and they would have given me the sense of security and safety that I had, I don't know that it would have been much of an issue that I was sexually abused. It's hard for me to imagine that it would have been. I think it's the context of abuse that's more important than the abuse itself. So let me explain. When a child is sexually abused, especially like someone in my case, which had happened over several years, and I was groomed over a period of time, there was a target on my back of some sorts, right? So that you're already knowing from that information alone, you know that that situation wasn't good for that child. Meaning this person saw me as a target. This person saw me as not having the safety and support and security that I needed in order to protect myself. Without abuse, that would have affected me. Let's say I had those experiences that I was a target for abuse, but I was never abused. That still would have been damaging.
What specifically? The experience, what would have been damaging? Just the mere fact that you were someone who happened to not be abused, but you were, so to speak, someone who was capable, like available to be? Like, I'm just trying to understand.
Right. So think about that. You have someone who wants to sexually abuse a child. So they're going to go after someone who's a ripe target for sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is that there isn't an adult who is likely to step in for this child.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're not there, but it means that the child may not feel safe enough to tell the adult and to lean on the adults in their life. And that's oftentimes not even a reflection of the adults as terrible. They can just be overwhelmed. It doesn't mean they're bad people. My parents are great. They're amazing. They gave me a lot, but they were overwhelmed. And I was in some way as a child standing alone on an island.
Right.
And this person picked up on that. So that experience, just not feeling safe, not feeling that sense of security, is going to set me up for certain things. It happened to be abuse. Let's say it this way. If you had a child, you have children?
I have no children.
No children.
That he knows of.
Yeah.
If God willing, one day you guys have children,
Amen.
if something happened to them, we won't even use the example of abuse, anything. Someone picked on them in school, okay, took their juice box and ran away. What would you want him to do?
Kid dies. Done.
How would the kid die?
I'm joking.
No, how would that happen? Let's say, how would that happen?
What do you mean? What's the actual question?
How are you going to know that this happened?
Oh, the child comes to you and tells you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No,
meaning that's a very important part of this process. So in order for the child to
I'm
come
not
to you and
raising
tell
no
you,
snitch.
what? That could be something.
That could be the reason why they don't
That
come
could
to
be
you.
the reason.
Because you shut down their, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right. That could be the reason. There are many reasons why a child chooses to shut up. I don't remember all the thoughts in my head. Some of it was I actually felt loved by this guy and I didn't want to kill the relationship.
Yeah.
So
there
was a deal I made.
The details. He was good to you.
Yeah,
he was
of
kind
course.
to you.
That's why I said
Well, that was
groomed.
part of his plan.
That's part of the grooming. That's part of the grooming. So now there's the setup for the event. There's the event itself. Now I don't say anything. Now it happens repeatedly. Of course, the sexual abuse is damaging. When I said earlier that in and of itself, it doesn't have to be that damaging. It's hard to strip it out of its context. That's what I'm saying.
Also, tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing this, but you're basically saying it's a symptom, not the cause. Meaning, even if the sexual abuse didn't happen, you're already in a shit show by the fact that you don't feel comfortable in general going over to a parent. Meaning, there's lots of people that haven't been abused that are again, obviously the abuse makes it much worse, right? But tell me if I'm correct by what you're saying, that even if the abuse doesn't occur, it's the fact that in the general concept, you didn't feel comfortable going over to your parent. That was really the issue. That's really where it started, you're saying.
Right. It's that lack of safety. And then for 15 years to hold on to the secret.
The shame that builds.
The shame. You spoke about masks at the beginning of this conversation. That was a mask that I had to wear without necessarily being conscious. I just had to push this down as much as possible.
Right.
I didn't want to share this to anyone. Eventually, I went to therapy for business-related issues, actually. And a therapist asked me if I was sexually abused. And I said yes. And it was like,
so I was going to ask you, that's fascinating to me, by the way, that last thing you just said. But I was literally, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you think a significant a significant cause of kids who are sexually abused is because of their that most of those kids don't have a relationship with their parents. They're either being abused by their actual parents, maybe not sexually, but emotionally, physically, or whatever, or, and therefore they're not close with their parents. Would you say that most of sexual abuse victims are in poor relationships with their parents and, as children?
Right. But the answer is yes, but we have to qualify that. Not in the way you would think.
Not always, you're saying?
No, meaning not in the way you would think, in that it doesn't mean they have a horrible and terrible relationship with their parents.
Like you said, you felt.
Yeah, I felt comfortable.
Neglect.
But I'm not even talking about serious neglect.
Interesting.
I'm not talking about that.
So why weren't you comfortable going over to them in that case?
I don't know 100% why, but I did speak to them about other things. There could have been other things that I brought up with them. Not there could have been. There were many other things.
You felt deep shame?
Some of it was shame. It's possible. It's possible I wanted to keep the relationship going, to tell you the truth.
Oh, it's with this guy.
Right.
Got it.
There are many things. It's possible I tried to say something. I don't remember all the details, but it's possible I tried to say something or I hinted at it and it wasn't well received and I never went back to it again.
Did you ever confront him?
I did. Yeah.
How did that go?
I used to say it was the most healing day of my life, but now I have to think about that after some ayahuasca ceremonies. But I have a talk on YouTube. It's called Secrets.
Yeah.
Secrets. I think it's called Secrets for Jewish Community Watch, where I shared a story at a Jewish Community Watch event, JCW, about a 4 or 5 year process to eventually confront my abuser and how healing that was. It was extremely, extremely healing to be able to sit down across from him and humanize him. But I do want to get to one point that I think is central. When we suggest that the people who abuse children are monsters, we miss most of the people who are abused by children. When we suggest that people who are sexually abused were raised in terrible families with total neglect, we miss most of the situations. So yes, there are some children who are sexually abused who don't have parents, divorced homes, foster children, right? Completely absent from their lives. And there are some people who are abused by monster type people.
Could you explain that first sentence you just said? Could you say it again? Because that one confused me.
Which one?
That not all abusers are monsters. You said
mean, they're not all these serial, looking around trying to touch as many kids as possible.
I was abused by a teenager.
Okay.
When I confronted him, I had this view of him as a monster. I surprise confronted him, where I called him over the phone and he wasn't expecting it. And he shared more than he was comfortable with on the phone with me, and actually was comfortable enough the next day calling my therapist and having a conversation. After that, he decided to tell a family member who recommended he speak to an attorney, and then he clammed up. And then it took a 4-year process to eventually sit down with me, him, and that same therapist. When I did, I had a number of questions for him. And as I started going through the questions, and I had a written statement that I read, at first he started kind of dodging it. Hey, I know I did some of those things, but it wasn't sexual and the intent wasn't sexual. And eventually I got very graphic with him and I shared very specific details, erection, orgasm, like I remembered things. And he broke down, more than broke down. He started hyperventilating. Right. Can barely get his words, gasping on the other couch. And eventually he turns to the therapist and he says, "Am I a monster? Can I go home to my kids?" Right. I have a question. Do monsters ask if they're monsters? No. He's not a monster. That wasn't who he was. And that's why we miss so many things when we assume it's a monster to sexually abuse, only monsters sexually abuse children. Clearly this wasn't the case. I don't know what was going on with him at 15 years old that he did that to me. Clearly it wasn't good.
Would you agree that a 15-year-old is very different than, let's say, a 37-year-old?
Of course, 100%.
So the same age child, I'm saying?
100%. Yeah, we could agree. Could we agree that most people who were sexually abused were abused by their own siblings?
Right.
So those are
the facts.
Right, those are the facts, and a lot of them.
We tend in society that when someone does something, it is easy to paint them as a monster,
and it's a big mistake.
And it's a big mistake, and it takes a lot of maturity and growth to be able to have enough empathy, even to look at someone who does something and be like, "What you did was monstrous, but you are not a monster."
Right. I'm grateful for that experience to be able to sit down with him. So I was able to bring him down to size and humanize him. Obviously, he was struggling then. Unforgivable what he did, and he has
we're not making excuses.
He has to make it right then. It's just for this kid, 15 years old, okay, who was around my home, and my parents thought very highly and everything else. If they looked at this kid and they said, "Is he a monster?" They would have said, "No, he's clearly not a monster. He seems to be a nice kid," and he wasn't a monster. that's a different question than is he capable of sexually abusing my child? And that's what I'm saying, is that if we say that only monsters can sexually abuse a child, then all the time we look at someone who's fully capable of sexually abusing a child for whatever reason, but they're not in the category of what we would think of as a monster, and therefore we miss it.
So how do you identify, in your opinion, if you're a parent, right? Off the bat, you've probably been asked this question a million times. I'm just curious because I was wondering, how do you identify someone who is potentially capable of, like, what are the signs? Someone potentially capable of sexually abusing a child versus someone just being a good guy.
So let's talk about my children and how I plan to protect them.
Please.
Okay, so
Do you have children?
I have 3 children.
Uh-huh.
The oldest is 4, so hopefully I'm a little before this, but by the statistics, not so much before. To prevent that first offense is pretty difficult. You're going to spot them. Let's say you had all the tricks to spot them, but maybe you won't see them, right? They're in school and you never saw that teacher in school. So all the tricks to spot them is not nearly as protective a measure as having a really solid relationship with your children. And that's the question. That's why I got stuck on that point that you mentioned. My parents were good parents. They were attentive. My house was clean. Our clothes were ironed. There was food, a hot meal on the table. They spoke to us, et cetera, et cetera. What we're talking about is an extreme sense of safety. I was also one of 9 children. My parents also did not have a lot of money. It was also very stressful for many people. And being in that environment made it difficult to give children the feeling of extreme safety. That's what they need. Extreme safety, not harsh neglect in order not to talk. It's extreme safety that when something goes wrong and there may have been a threat or some relationship they don't want to lose or whatever else is going on, that nevertheless they feel 100% safe. And the other, I think the psychological term, a psychologist would call it attunement, right? We're attuned to children.
Right.
And that's one of the comforts I have, is that my wife is very, very attuned to my children. And the smallest thing she's picking up on, to the point that she'll hear from the other room a cry and she'll tell me what that cry means. That's a cry from physical pain. That's a cry from embarrassment. That's a cry from tired. She's very
smart.
sensitive.
You can never ever prove her wrong.
What?
So she's smart. You can never prove her wrong.
She'll hear it. She'll say, oh, he just got hurt.
Right.
Right. So that kind of attunement is so necessary for children. And then we'll know there's something off. You don't stop until
Can you learn that attunement if it doesn't come natural?
Marry the attunement.
Marry the attunement.
If you don't have it, marry it.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah.
Marry the
It's
attunement.
like if you don't have money, you just marry, right? For girls. They just marry a guy that does.
Do you have more questions on this topic?
I have one other question. What do you feel that the extreme safety allows for? Like, why do you feel like that's the preventative for this to happen?
It allows for the communication. Yeah. And that's what I was saying, is that, first of all, there is no target on the child's back. There was a target on my back, and that's been the case with many, many people I've spoken with who were sexually abused. There was a target on their back. As a matter of fact, I mentioned the story with the therapist I went to. He was the very first person who asked me if I was sexually abused. And he's not the first therapist I saw. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I got into a fight in school, and the school made me go to a therapist. And that therapist didn't ask me if I was sexually abused.
Right.
This therapist did. And I asked him many times after that, why did you ask me that question? Is this a standard question you ask everyone? And he said, no, I was picking up something on you. So that target on my back was there when I was in my 20s still, in a different way. And he noticed it. So we don't create a situation where there's a target on the child's back. Right. That's number one. Number two is, if something did happen, then it can be addressed right away. Right. It was the 15 years of that infection sitting inside me. And the proof is that today I feel good about it. So the 15 years that I kept it a secret, that was the problem. The fact that it happened is not what's killing me today. Granted, there are things I have to deal with as a result of it. I'm sure there are still more that I'll uncover as a result of the abuse plus the context that it happened in, but I don't carry nearly the pain that I once did around this.
Right. Is there a factor of like knowing how to trust someone again, that they're not grooming you or trying to take advantage of you? Like, was there a process in trying to learn how to do that?
It starts to feel like that. Eventually, as the healing process progresses, it's not about trusting other people, it's trusting ourselves. And that's who we're really relearning to trust, is ourselves.
That we could spot someone that could potentially do something to us like that?
That we can feel when something isn't right for us, and we can...
Intuition-based.
We know our own boundaries. Learning our own boundaries.
Interesting.
That it feels off, and that's enough for us.
Got it.
There's a great quote. It says, a bird doesn't sit relaxed on a branch because it trusts the branch, but rather it trusts its wings.
Love it. Yeah, I know that quote. That's great.
I don't know that. Churchill, right?
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain.
It's one of those two.
Albert Einstein.
It's so every quote you've ever heard attributed to Albert Einstein, not true. Every single one. Okay, I want to change the subject a little bit. I saw one of your videos, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you called anxiety a teacher. I think you called it our greatest teacher. I have a more well said question, but my basic question is, that's a fucked up lesson plan. And what I'm getting at is, I think that you said that in the context of a conversation around what we do with anxiety in society, which is we intend to medicate or we numb. But for a lot of people, for everyone, like most people's anxiety, they're not looking and going, what are you trying to teach me? They're going, oh my God, I can't breathe. I can't function. I can't function in my relationships. Like, yeah, I need you to speak to that, because that took me, like, that's almost like, oh, that's nice as a teacher, but I've listened to my anxiety for years, and it doesn't always seem to have a lesson.
It doesn't have a lesson. You just said the lesson.
What's the lesson?
What did you say? You said I can't breathe.
Question is why?
No, so breathe. You're saying this feeling is coming to me. I can't breathe. So breathe.
And wait, okay. Let's cross. Do you believe that there's such a thing as chemical depression, chemical anxiety, where there is no psychological, it is on the chemical level, this person has an imbalance?
I don't believe they've proven that exists.
I feel like I'm going really hard on you right now.
Right,
I'm like, you're not a scientist nor a doctor.
I'm not.
You're just a guy.
Right.
But
I don't believe that they've proven that I exist, but from my own experience, which is why I talk. And when I say own experience, it's not only my experience.
Yeah.
When I say my experience, I also mean the many people who felt comfortable sharing their stories with me, and also being around 12 Steps, just being in a space where many people are sharing their stories. Is I've yet to meet someone who struggles with mental health issues who didn't also have pretty serious traumas in their childhood.
Interesting.
And
Yes.
and while we can say that about everyone was traumatized, while you're talking to them, they'll tell you their traumas. They'll literally tell you what it was. So you want to say a chemical imbalance? Okay, I hear it, but I'm also hearing a story of trauma. So find me the person who doesn't have the story of trauma, who has a chemical imbalance.
And do you think that that's a one of the lessons anxiety teaches people is you need to breathe? What's that lesson?
To breathe is to accept.
Yeah, you took it out of my mouth. That's literally what I was going to say.
To breathe is to accept.
Can you speak more to that?
You can't fight the anxiety. It's there for a reason. There's something going on. At least what I've learned in my life is that whenever I tried fighting the anxiety, I'm a fighter by nature. Like, I don't give up on anything ever. And my anxiety would be talking to me, and I would just be going against it and grinding against it. And eventually I'm just like, I can't control this. It's relinquishing a level of control and just being like, okay, this is it. And this is the way it is. And all of a sudden there's a calmness that comes with that acceptance that it's going to be okay no matter what.
Right, I've heard about this. It's the paradox of the moment you accept it, it gets less.
Correct.
But
Let's say it this way. Anxiety is not the first warning, right? Anxiety is a pretty intense feeling. So I'm going to assume that anyone who's feeling anxiety has ignored a certain message for a period of time, and the message needs a home. There's something coming, right? There's a teacher that needs a lesson to be received, and the teacher's creative. But the first time he'll whisper it, he'll pass a note under, he'll do it in a nice way. So he'll bury the lesson in a book while you're reading, and that'll be okay. But if you're not learning it, then at some point in time, it takes over your whole world.
Yeah.
And anxiety does that.
Also, tell me if I'm right. That anxiety also is, sometimes people have anxiety. They're not even self-aware enough to understand where it's coming from. But a lot of that, I would think, is trying to recognize actually where that anxiety is a lot of times at a subconscious level.
I think one of the things anxiety does is make people much less capable of the sort of critical, calm thinking that is necessary to be self-aware of where their anxiety is coming from.
That's the teacher. That's exactly what I'm saying. That
And
is the teacher.
Right. The lesson very often is to force someone to breathe. At the time it reaches anxiety or panic, it's to force someone to breathe, because it's in that breathing that the awareness and the lesson will come. But let me give you a practical example, because I realize some of this is esoteric. A practical example from someone I spoke to recently. lost his job, dealing with health issues, and he tells me he's struggling with anxiety. Okay. So I started asking him questions around his anxiety and what he's anxious about. A lot of it is money-related issues, but then repeatedly through the conversation, he dropped something interesting. And he says, in some ways I like it because it drives me. And I don't know where my motivation would come from work without the anxiety. So as he's saying this more and more, I said, you notice that you want some of it, you want just enough. So what is the anxiety going to teach this person? This is my worldview, right? Where there's a God in the world. God's number one instruction through the Torah, from what I've heard, I haven't counted, is al tira, do not fear. So this person is making a deal with the devil. He's saying, I'm going to feed just enough anxiety into my system in order to motivate me. And he's going to ignore the fact that there's a completely different way to motivate us, whether it's purpose-driven motivation or possibility or whatever it is. God's way of motivating people. It doesn't always have to be through that heavy, intense fear.
He's inviting the anxiety.
He's inviting the anxiety in. So now the anxiety wants to teach him this lesson. What his teacher wants to teach him this lesson is that, and this is a deal with the devil. Don't try to manage what percentage of anxiety you're going to have so that it's motivation and not overwhelm. So what it's going to do is just dial up that anxiety all the way until eventually he says to himself, basically saying, have you had enough? Have you had enough of your way? Have you had enough of trying to manage anxiety? Are you ready to give this game up? And now a whole different possibility of life. And he kept asking me during the course of the conversation, he said, aren't you afraid that, shouldn't I be worried that I'll lose my motivation? I said, I had the same fear. When I started 12 Steps, when I started other things, I had the same fear that I'd lose my motivation for money, because a lot of the motivation for money comes from insecurities. So I said, hey, my insecurities are driving it, but I had enough with the porn addiction. It wasn't that much of a struggle, but I see with this guy it was. So what I said to him was that, no, I'm not afraid, because right now I'm more hungry for money than I've ever been, but in a very different way. I'm less attached to it, but there's more I want to do in the world. There's more
purpose
use.
now.
Right, but there's more things that I actually want to do in the world that money needs. I have a stronger desire for it than I did previously, but I'm not as afraid of losing it as I once was at the same time. So that's the anxiety trade-off. But he has to believe that. He has to believe that this is possible. That's an example of a lesson I think anxiety could be given. And frankly, for someone like this, I don't see a better way than the way it's doing it to him. I don't know of a better way to teach this. There's no book he can read it in. He just has to experience anxiety in its full glory. Like Tony Robbins, he has I was at one of his conferences once, and he said the story of teaching someone how to get over smoking. And he's like, take a cigarette, another cigarette, another cigarette, another cigarette. And he would not let the guy stop smoking until he was just coughing and throwing out all the cigarettes. He said at one point he had 20 or 30 cigarettes in his mouth. And that was the lesson that Tony Robbins trying to teach him. Like, you want smoke? Here it is. Have at it. Don't have one at a time. Have 20 at a time. Don't take a 5-minute break. Take a 5-second break between them. Keep going, keep going. And anxiety sometimes does the same thing. You want it, have at it. Here's everything you can have until you're vomiting. And then you don't
It's
want
a hard lesson to take.
It is a hard lesson, but
I'm not sure what I think about that Tony Robbins story either, but
these are tough students.
Right.
They are.
Let me ask you, Orthodoxy, you grew up regular from, right?
Chabad, yeah.
Chabad from, okay.
Explain regular from.
Then you weren't regular from as in traditional from, the way we refer to it. So
grew up Chabad, he was diet from.
So then you left, organized religion at some point.
I left the practice completely.
Left the practice completely. Okay.
There was a point in time where the only mitzvah I was consciously attached to was tzedakah.
Wow, it's beautiful though. It's actually a beautiful mitzvah. Right? What do they say? Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. Okay, fine. Next, moving on. Now, my question to you is: do you feel in the healing process it's a necessary thing for a lot of people to walk away from religion? In this case, in our case, Orthodoxy, to a lot of times heal, especially with the religious trauma that comes a lot of times involved in that.
I can't say a lot, but in fact, I've recommended it to people.
Right. So that's my question. So what is your response to all the people that are obviously like, well, how could you tell someone to, not keep Torah, mitzvahs, and all that stuff, and,
right.
Walk away from it, in order to go on their journey, their healing journey?
I would say they're probably not keeping it now either.
Right. Okay, explain.
Like, was I keeping Shabbos when it was all from guilt and fear and all of the other stuff? Was that Shabbos? Was I experiencing Shabbos? I got none of it. So that's on the one hand. The other thing is what's at stake. Where what, a lot of people like to pretend that things are okay. You asked earlier in the conversation about quiet desperation. Yes, most people are living lives of quiet desperation. Look at the average amount of time that people are spending on social media and Netflix and all. These are lives of quiet desperation. Obviously, there are different extremes of that. But when you're looking at a population which is so heavily medicated and many other issues, physical ailments and emotional ailments and psychological ailments, then you're saying, okay, this isn't working. And that's the case also. Who am I recommending to not do that? First of all, it's not a blanket recommendation, but I'll give you an example of someone, who he was struggling very heavily with the fact he was Orthodox. He couldn't see himself live any other way, but he's only ever been sexually with a man. He was sexually abused as a child. He had sexual relationships with other teenagers as a teenager, like in his class, and that's all he knew. And then he had this massive conflict inside him with his sexual preferences, identity. He doesn't even know what it is. And this religion, and was creating this massive, massive, massive conflict inside him. And I said, I recommend to him, step away. Just step away from all of this. What this is doing to you every single day. I said, let's agree that the sex has been too much. Right? Doesn't matter who it's been. So he chose to go enter the 12 steps and live an abstinent lifestyle. Okay, so he's sexually abstinent at this point. Now, within that sexual abstinence, while he's figuring out what he is and who he is, having these religious practices every single day was creating a fire inside him that I think would have destroyed him.
Right.
Just walk away. Don't worry. God will understand.
Yeah.
So, am I recommending this for everyone? No. Was it helpful for myself? Yeah, I walked away from.
I think there's a lot of empathy, kindness, and logic to what you're saying. What pains me is that I know that there are people of authority in the Jewish world who would say at the end of the day, all good points, halacha.
There are many that would not say that, though.
I know.
There's always.
I know, but if we're diagnosing a problem, I'm not talking about the people who wouldn't. I've met many of the people who say they wouldn't, and thank God that's becoming more popular. But we are not going to deny the fact that a lot of orthodoxy is structured around there's a Shulchan Aruch, get healthy on your own time, work on the relationship with God on your own time. But there's a Shulchan Aruch.
That's fine. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a rabbi.
Right.
I'm not coming from that place, and I can say certain things that a rabbi wouldn't. Ultimately, what is our end goal? First of all, there are many rabbis I think who would agree. Who would agree?
I was going to ask if you've been in touch with rabbis who.
Have I had this specific question? I think that within Judaism, there's the understanding that there's only 3 laws that won't be violated for human life. That's number 1.
That's what I'm saying. Part of this is how you identify the problem, mental health. Do you see it as a pikuach nefesh situation or not?
Well, what he was saying is most of these people aren't going to commit suicide, but they will live lives of quiet desperation.
One second, hold on. But they are.
I'm talking about someone who 100% is not going to.
I spoke to a rabbi.
Yeah.
And he said depression. Not a rabbi, he's a rav, a dayan who sits in a basin. And he said to me that someone who's depressed, that's considered pikuach nefesh.
Yeah.
And the Gemara, it says, ani kemes, an impoverished person is the same as a dead person. Many people are financially impoverished. Mm. That too is an issue. The fact that we accept that this is normal, like this is not the life we should be living. We should not be struggling financially.
It's not the life God wants us to live.
No, he doesn't. No, absolutely not. And if someone is in very difficult situations, then yeah, we do have to question everything. Like the stakes are high. These are not, it's not, these are not minor preferences. These are life and death and many different variations of life and death.
Yeah, I like the idea of just like an ani is kames, potentially this quiet life of desperation where you're just literally miserable. It's kames.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people, like he's saying, there are so many people. I mean, honestly, I hate to say this, and this may sound bad, but there are so many people just in the 9-to-5 sector who are dying to not be in the 9-to-5 sector, right? They want to be creating their own businesses and running after their dreams and everything, but they're too scared or whatever. They have certain things that in a lot of ways is quite desperation. They want to be doing something else with their day, every day, going after the things that they enjoy, and they're forced to freaking get up and live a miserable day until they get home at 6 o'clock because they have to do what they got to do, and I think there's an element to that. Again, I'm not putting any of those people down. It's just the reality that there are a lot of people doing. It's like Gary Vaynerchuk always says. He's like, when you're young, take your shot because, that's when you have your opportunity, so to speak. Supposed to when you have 3 kids, and it's much scarier to have to leave a 9 to 5. It's that idea, though. I think,
Yeah.
Listen, I think Tony Robbins, quote him again, he says, you get what you tolerate. Right? You get what you tolerate. And in our society, for sure, both Jewish communities and beyond, we have low standards in a lot of areas of our life, like terribly, terribly low standards in a lot of areas of our lives.
So I want to ask you that. Do you think nowadays generation is definitely, let's say is looked at as much more, wussy, let's call it for lack of a better word, than the previous generation, right? People are pretty soft.
Because we're talking about feelings or because of...
So I'm asking, so I was saying, as far as I'm in total agreement with you, as far as the inability to tolerate any level of pain and just the softness. But I do think that talking about feelings is a beautiful thing that has come in a certain way that this generation has that the previous one didn't. What are your thoughts on the direction that we've gone in from the previous generation to this? Are we better off? Are we worse off? Do we need to have both?
I think the pain has gotten so bad for so many of us that we're just screaming out and looking for something better. And hopefully more and more of us just keep pushing and searching and questioning everything and raising those standards. So I think the answer is both. The answer is that there are certain things that are much worse than they've ever been. For sure, much worse than they've ever been. And there are, in other ways, people are paying attention and speaking out, but I think much of that is coming from a reaction to pain. 12 Steps taught me to pray to God in my own words.
Right.
Which it says in Judaism, but I didn't have a practice for it. Within 12 Steps, it actually gave me a specific practice. And a couple of years ago, something happened at work that bothered me a lot. Like, it was consuming me tremendously. A guy in the finance department made a mistake, sent a wire to the wrong account, and I was just like really bugged out about it. And I was saying, like, why this thing that it brought to my attention is something that's been bothering me for months, literally months. And I didn't pay attention until $100,000 went to the wrong customer,
right?
To the wrong to a non-account.
So it's all you trust that intuition that you were initially...
Right. So I was like, why did I need this?
Yeah.
In order to finally do what I already knew to do. And I dealt with that, but it was bothering me a lot. And I wrote a prayer to myself. And the prayer was that I stopped needing pain and suffering in order to learn. And then instead of only pain and suffering, that I also can learn from possibility. I can also learn from the potential that we have. And those, meaning if something gets real bad, we all wake up.
We change. The pain makes us change.
Pain makes us change. But if I tell you it's possible for this,
we don't.
Does that motivate you as much? Because sometimes that gap is much bigger than the pain gap.
Also, if it's working, why fix if it's working? And it's like,
but what's working?
Right. Working enough.
Right.
What's working?
So I just want to go back to the first thing you said. You were talking about this generation, right? Can you expound on what you were saying again? Just
which portion?
You were basically saying that you feel this generation is much weaker.
No, I didn't say that. You said that.
So what did you say?
I said that in terms of the level of pain, it's higher than ever. Some people are reacting to that pain in good ways.
Okay.
I think that what you guys are doing with this to bring awareness to different kind of conversations is a reaction to that as well, and a healthier reaction, and say, let's talk about stuff. Let's stop burying things under the rug. It's been too long. But why weren't guys talking about this 70 years ago? Why did it take
because the pain reached us.
Right, the pain didn't reach. So are things better? I think there's hope now. I think there's hope for a lot of people that things are better. And I think we got to keep an open mind and raise our standards. We got to raise our standards across the board. Talk about obesity, right? It's through the roof, but what do we need? We need like severe cancer to go to a doctor. There's so many issues. And that's an example, and there are many, many examples of this.
At the end of the day, talking about it, just talking, the more things getting talked about, the less taboo, the better we'll be.
I'll give you an example. I spoke to a prominent rabbi about psychedelics. Mm-hmm. And the first time I spoke to him, he was had a very negative tone towards it. Why is this necessary? I don't see how this is necessary. Mm-hmm. I shared more and more of my personal experience, and he said, okay, I get it. I get it for someone who's struggling. If the risk is that you might, cheat on your wife and destroy a family, then I get it. If the risk is that you might drink yourself into a stupor, I get it. So for those people who are dealing with very serious issues.
Why isn't being miserable a risk enough?
That's what I told him. I said, who are you to say that like this is a big enough problem, but the other problem is not big enough?
Yeah.
Who says?
I'm in pain. Like that's enough of a reason.
Who says?
I love that. I love that.
Who's to say one person's happy with $30,000 a year and another person's miserable at $1 million a year? And not miserable in the sense that they're miserable. miserable in the sense that they want more for themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe they should, because they
Maybe
could.
they should.
If you knew a guy like Elon Musk can do what he does, and you understood that, you had that information, and you see him in a job,
Making 80,000.
no, let's say 50,000 a month. Let's say $1 million a month.
Right.
Right. And the guy's walking around all happy, and you had this information that he can do these huge things,
Right.
Change electric markets. You go to him like, dude, you should be miserable. Like, do you understand your potential? So that's what I'm saying is that
Okay.
if you had that information, obviously,
If
there's some
someone's
possibility.
miserable because they're aware of their potential, my full all systems go after it. But let's not
I'm
to
using the
use
wrong
potential
language.
as a battering ram. Like, you should be miserable. Let him be happy. For all
I'm-
we know, Elon Musk would be way happier.
I'm
Make it 50. Have more time. He could have stuck with one wife, had only a few kids.
It's
But
not
who
the
said,
money.
who,
It's
but
not
who
the
said
money,
the purpose
really.
is happier?
I think he misses Grimes.
But who said the purpose is happier?
I don't know.
But
They could
listen,
tell you.
miserable was the wrong language. But I'm trying to make a point, and the
I know,
point is
yeah,
that we have incredibly low standards
Right.
in a lot of areas of our life.
I think
I agree
mental
about-
health for sure.
So that's what I'm asking.
I think what people accept as, oh, I'm doing okay. Like, bro, you're not okay.
I was by a shliach once, and he had a lot of people there. It was like 40, 50 people at his dinner, and him and his wife were stressed out. At some point when everyone left, I was staying there for Shabbos. So I saw kind of the tension that some other people didn't see. And I said, why don't you get some help? Like, why don't you get, I don't know, babysitters or help serving? You have a lot of people here. So, it's too hard to find help. I'm like, come on, you can't tell me it's too hard to find help. You never said it's too hard to find a house. I'm sleeping in a garden tonight.
Right.
What do you mean it's too hard to find help? Like, if the minimum is that we're not going to serve 50 people, I'm going to put everything on my wife, right? Then
Yeah.
you would get it. The same way you never slept on a lawn. You'd call all your friends and
Yeah.
family and say, I can't afford the mortgage. I'm not sleeping on the lawn tonight. So do the same thing with a maid. Call in reinforcement. But
Yeah.
don't have your wife serve 50 people and take care of 6 babies.
Yeah, no, don't do that. That's a recipe for divorce.
Yeah.
I want to just circle back for a second to the sexual abuse piece. Does that correlate specifically with porn addiction, or sexual abuse just like could be go to any other addiction? Meaning, is there any specific correlation between porn addiction and sexual abuse?
Yes and no.
Okay,
Yes
could you
and
explain
no.
on that?
Meaning it could go anywhere, right?
It could.
Abuse.
Okay.
Abuse can go anywhere. But if someone's sexuality is touched, I don't question that a big part of my sexual addiction came from the fact that I was specifically sexually abused. And the reason I say that is because there were certain memories I have from the abuse that intrigued me and that I wanted to learn more from pornography.
Right.
So it definitely was something that that it opened up there.
Did you also have the feeling that you were complicit in it and have shame because of the fact that you were complicit? I don't know if you were, but because I've heard people say similar, that they felt they were complicit because they enjoyed it at the time, or things of that
Right.
nature.
So I felt like I was weak because he overpowered me, physically overpowered me.
Got it.
And I felt like I was stupid because he fooled me. I definitely felt that. In terms of complicity, we have to talk about what child sex abuse is, because child sex abuse, we're not referring to a situation where there's force. Where there's force, it doesn't need to be a child. Anyone, right? An adult can be
No.
abused, and it's abuse. They're forced at knife point.
Right.
What we're talking about is a situation which appears to have consent. But because it's a child, it's not the only situations, but it's those situations are included too in child sex abuse. That it appears to have consent, but you say, no, it's a child. You can't say a 30-year-old man got consent from a 12-year-old girl.
Right.
That's not what. But those same things happening with a 30-year-old and a 25-year-old, you'd say was consent. But if there was force, the 25-year-old was sexually abused also.
Right.
So when we're saying child sex abuse, we're talking about something that were everything equal, and these were 2 adults, it would not be abuse. But because there's a child in there, it's child sex abuse. If it's not that, then yeah, it's child abuse as well, but it's also rape or physical violence, or if they're forced in some way. The reason I say that is because many people question whether they were sexually abused as a child because they went along in some way. But that's exactly what we're talking about when we say child sex abuse, that it appears on its face that you went along with it in some way.
Right.
That's what appears. But because you were a child, you obviously didn't know.
That's so much more insidious. The lines are so much more blurred for the kid. When like someone fully overpowered you, but it's confusing when someone you trust doesn't overpower you.
A lot of the damage of sexual abuse is the confusion around it.
Yeah. That lack of clarity.
Yeah, I shared my story recently with Faith Neath, someone I interviewed, and someone who found me through her said that she's been working on her trauma and other issues for a bunch of years, but she heard me say something in the conversation about being sexually abused by a teenager. And she said she always minimized her experience because it was a teenager that abused her. And she said when she heard me say that and she saw the pain that I conveyed, it was a speech from when I was just starting to talk about this topic. So you can see the pain, coming out of me. And she said, I was then able to finally accept my own pain, that even though I was sexually abused by a child, it still was really painful.
Wow.
Right. No, I mean, that's a famous thing about people in general. We tend to sometimes ask ourselves, is our pain
Valid.
worthy of being valid? Right? Is it valid? And the answer is if it's painful, then it's valid. I think that's
Well said.
yeah, done.
And the confusion, and that is an additional level of pain.
Yeah, it's like re-victimization. It's like another level on top of it.
Right, 100%. Yes, sometimes I'm talking to people who are struggling, recognizing that their parents like neglected them in some way. They said, yeah, they tried their best. And I'm almost like, this guy's life would have been easier if he just had a tyrant for a father.
Right.
Because he wouldn't be able to look at him and say,
oh my gosh.
like he was bad and I can accept the pain.
Right.
And instead he sits there for 20 years and saying,
Ask
I felt
yourself,
bad,
right.
but
Right.
he was a pretty good guy.
That's interesting divergence here for a second, but in talking about porn addiction and shame, we live in a society now where there's a huge push away from shame, specifically around sex positivity. And I wanted to pick your brain about that because I have also dabbled in the dark arts myself. I've seen some pornography and I've gone on Reddit.
You have
to look for specific stuff. And I mean, there's two ways to view this. There's a way to view this of like, oh God, society's breaking down. Like people are like, hey, you cashed the game last night? Also check out this video. Yeah, it's great. There's the other way, which is like, there's a lot less shame. There's a lot less shame. Dr. Tepfer, when we spoke with him, said that in the non-religious clients that he sees, like it's not taboo. It's not shameful at all.
Pornography is not.
Pornography is not. Right. Well, sexuality in general, sex work is work. I mean, I think most people would still argue that porn is unethical, and there's a lot of awareness around what it does to the dopamine in your brain and how it can, it harms the people who watch it as much as it sometimes harms the people in the industry. But what are your thoughts just in general about like, it does seem like society is moving away from shame around it, and that has got to be a good thing, no?
Yes and no. There's a shamelessness to it.
Interesting.
There's right. Sometimes we're way too open about it.
What deserves shame around pornography? What about pornography is
life
shameful?
in general? I think we should ask that question.
True,
but the answer really is I think nothing should deserve shame. Would you agree with that?
No, there is shame.
No,
there's
he said he doesn't want shame.
There's a great researcher on shame. There's a great researcher on shame. He would be a lot more famous if not for Brene Brown. She kind of came and upended his John Bradshaw. He talks about, he has a great book, Healing the Shame That Binds Us, and he makes a real distinction between healthy shame and toxic shame. But if you think about what shame is, shame, going back to Adam and Eve, the first recognition, why did they notice their nakedness? Because they noticed their separateness. Till then, they were one. They felt that oneness with God. And then after eating of the tree of knowledge, what they came to know was their separateness. So their separateness induced their shame to cover their nakedness. Some of that is good. Not all of that is toxic shame. The fact that I am separate from you is appropriate. That's why I'm not going to shit in front of you, for example. I know I'm separate.
I really appreciate that, by the way.
Right. So that's shame. That's healthy shame. Healthy shame is the recognition of what separates us so that we can connect.
Say that one more time. I want to digest that properly. Healthy shame is
the recognition of what separates.
The recognition of what separates us.
What makes me distinct from you.
What about pornography is separation?
So let's talk about the toxic shame. That, and then we'll get back to the pornography. The toxic shame is what makes me feel so separate from you that I cannot connect to you anymore. I don't feel like I'm worthy of connection with another human being. So the healthy shame is a separation that then allows me to connect because I recognize
that there's a distance. Because
I recognize that my BO smells worse to you than it does to me. We're different in that way. I can smell it. I'm like, okay, not so bad. But you'll smell it and you'll be, I don't want to sit next to the guy. Right. So I'll take a shower and I'll dress
So
appropriately
that we can reconnect.
so that we can connect.
An unhealthy shame would
An
be
unhealthy
my
shame-
I'm a disgusting freak. Let me
Exactly. I don't even want to stand next to the person. Okay. It's over.
I've been meaning to tell you, but yeah.
It's
Those-
simplifying it a little bit.
Right.
And with pornography, what happens is, what happened to me is I start watching it, and then I feel that if anyone knew this about me, then they'd never want to be my friend.
Right.
They'd never want to connect with me. So it turns it in that it turns like that. If we go to complete shamelessness, I mean, people running down the street naked, does that make it easier to connect? So I think that may be a good way. I've never articulated
Some
this way,
people
but that
argue
may
it
be a good
does.
way to make the distinction. Ultimately, we're wired for connection.
Mhm.
The worst punishment you can give someone, if you give many prisoners talk about
Solitary
this,
confinement.
solitary confinement, worse
Yeah.
than, right? Give them 40 lashes. Don't give them solitary confinement.
Nothing's
It's
as bad.
brutal. It's brutal. We need connection. We need that. We need that belonging. We need that.
Loneliness.
It's
palpable.
debilitating. It's
Debilitating,
crazy.
yeah.
It's absolutely debilitating.
I don't. The furthest thing from invalidating your experiences, I am honestly curious. You were a young, healthy man watching pornography in Crown Heights, and you felt like you couldn't tell your friends.
This
Your
is
friends
before
didn't?
it was normal.
No,
This is years
hold
ago.
on 1 second.
I'm
I'm not
asking.
I'm not saying that I couldn't tell someone that I watched pornography. The shame was that I was dependent on pornography, that I couldn't not
that you couldn't not watch
I
it.
couldn't not watch
But
pornography.
it wasn't just,
that
I
is a
assume,
distinction.
I would assume it was also not just watching for 5 minutes, right?
It was daily.
But I'm saying, is it daily for 5 minutes? Like when I was speaking to Dr. Tab I should say, he described it, and I've spoken to other, people that have told me straight they're porn addicts where they're watching for hours on end. Like
Some are, some aren't. Is it too much for you? At some point in time, I was not doing it anymore because I wanted to do it. I was doing it because I didn't want the feeling of thinking about it.
Well,
You just need to get it out of your mind. You just need to do it.
I was just so consumed with it. I was so consumed with the thought. And I'm not only talking about pornography. Like I said, it went beyond that. The thoughts consumed me.
if you're a porn addict, are you a sex addict also? Is that,
Yes.
It's the same.
But it doesn't mean you're addicted to all aspects of sex. Within sex addiction, someone may be addicted to exhibitionism, where they like to expose themselves in front of people. Someone else may be addicted to voyeurism, would like to see naked people. So there are people who can only be addicted to pornography, but if they're addicted to pornography, then they're addicted to an aspect of sex. It's a sex addiction. Some people are only addicted to masturbation.
Right.
I want to say a statement. I want to see if you'd agree with it. I agree fully that shamelessness is a bad thing, personal level and a societal level. But I would say that if you're going to give someone a choice in society and in how we structure things, I would always rather err on the side of shamelessness than shamefulness. And you could see a lot of what is happening societally right now with Gen Z and just with like the push is a push towards what we call an overcorrection, towards a little bit of shamelessness, because we've reached a point of no more shame.
Is it
Please
possible?
God, no more shame.
Right. Is it possible that shamelessness
Mhm.
is rooted in shame?
I'd have to think about that, but maybe. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that you're feeling shame for so long over a certain behavior,
Mhm.
and then you say, you know what, just F it.
It's like a
F it. I'm just
yeah.
going completely in the other direction. Like I'm not sitting here anymore with your
Even
stupid
thinking
rules.
about-
So what about the
making me
rom-com
feel-
thing, right?
What?
That when you have something that's too far one way, you overcorrect all the way to the other side and end up in the golden mean.
Maybe, and maybe now we're overcorrecting by talking about things that are traditionally private.
I think societally that is what, I mean, we were
Right.
speaking with a guest yesterday that I don't know if I can mention on camera, but we were speaking with a guest yesterday and he was talking about, this over-believing women, right? With where now we're unfortunately in a society where like kind of like someone can come out and say like a man did something to me and the cards are going to be very stacked against the man. You can ruin someone's life with that. And he was bemoaning this culture. But I am too, but I also see it as a very obvious overcorrection to the fact that like they never were believed for anything, and most rapes go completely unprosecuted, and it's you could basically rape with impunity in this country, and these things they will even out. So like the shamelessness around like people just talking about porn like it's pizza, is it possible that's going to even out? This is all a societal overcorrection. Perhaps even
So maybe
healthy
we're doing
societal
that.
overcorrection.
Maybe we're doing that, talking about it like it's pizza. I guess if we can all be clear on what the ideal is and what the end goal is, then we have agreement. Yeah.
And how would you describe that ideal? What do you see as an ideal society around sex and sex work and pornography and all of this?
What I found for myself and in speaking with others is that healthy sexuality, a whole integrated sexuality. I asked Gabor Mate, what does healthy mean? What does healing mean? He said it comes from the word whole. Whole would mean integrated. It's connected to the other parts of oneself. So one of the ways I describe the sex I like to have, it's good before, it's good during, and it's good after. Right before.
You don't like the cry after? It's like my favorite part.
The what?
The crying afterwards is like my favorite part.
Crying afterwards?
Yeah, when I'm just bawling afterwards, I feel terrible.
If you like that, then it's good after, right? So the before, during, and after. Before, what I mean by that is that unhealthy sex for me was an obsession. So it wasn't good before. I was like, couldn't stop thinking about it. So it's good before, during, and after. One way that happens for me, and I think many others, is when sex is connected to intimacy. When sex is stripped from intimacy, then it often derails. And then at some point in time, it doesn't feel all that good. So I think if we can have sex with intimacy as much as possible, then
that makes a lot of sense, actually.
And obviously with pornography, there's no way to have intimacy involved in that sexual experience.
Theoretically, there's no way to have intimacy. But I guess there's a way to have some form of intimacy in masturbation.
I was about to ask that. Yes, I was gonna ask point blank if you masturbate, because here's the thing, and someone just told me this right before this interview.
Could you just explain that? Hold on, you said that there is a way. Could you explain that? How there's something, how there could be intimacy within masturbation?
You can have intimacy with yourself.
So that's what I'm trying to understand. That point, I don't understand that.
I think there could be an experience that's more healthy. I think theoretically there could be an experience with masturbation that's not looking to numb, that's not looking to escape, but that's looking to connect to oneself, to experience. Maybe it's easier for females than for males in that regard. But I think that potentially there is this, separate and aside from what halacha has to say about it. But I think there could be a intimate experience
getting to be with yourself in that.
I think women find this that whether this is biological or societal, women find this concept much easier than men.
The idea
of using even like masturbation or any sort of self-sexuality in a sort of like loving yourself sort of way. Men kind of use it as like, I need to get this off me. It's almost like, get it off, I need it. And like women, like, oh my God, you talk to a woman, they're like, well, I light a few candles, I read like a passage from my favorite book, like I'm connecting to me, it's me time. Like, whoa.
Right, give yourself a full body massage first. And
they're taking themselves on a date, and I just think I'm jealous. I'm like, this seems ideal. This seems healthy.
And they don't even know the human being to even enjoy it.
You took me out of the equation completely.
And you asked this question to Binyamin Tepfer.
I didn't push Binyamin
as
hard as I'm pushing you.
But you asked Binyamin Tepfer a question, I think, about, say, a couple watching pornography.
Yes. I think that was me.
Could that...
I'm blushing.
Okay, I'm saying in there.
He watched our pod. I'm blushing. Okay.
Yeah, he did. Of course, we were talking about it.
Could that be an intimate experience? Yes, it does have the potential to derail in some way, which he mentioned. But I think
slippery slope.
Maybe, but it's a couple, and I don't know. Potentially for someone like me, it could be a very slippery slope.
Right. Well, exactly.
But for someone maybe who didn't dabble,
I was going to say from the woman's standpoint, it's like it's weird to me if a woman is comfortable. I could be way off on this, but I would just think it's weird to me if a woman is comfortable with her guy looking at other naked women and getting turned on.
But she's looking at other men. There's another guy on the screen.
But it's not the same.
That's not your penis on screen.
It's not the same thing, though. I don't think.
Oh, maybe we don't know.
That's what I'm saying. If it's agreed upon, right?
Different in that sense. I don't know.
I'm saying theoretically it can happen, but the problem with pornography, the problem with pornography is the message it's conveying, what's underneath it, the industry that it's feeding. It's not.
The industry has a lot of problems.
What?
A lot.
No, you're saying the industry it's feeding, or just what do you mean by the industry it's feeding? Could you explain that? Like the porn industry?
Where these porn stars coming from?
Meaning,
like if you look at some of the,
they're like runaways from the Midwest, and they get groomed.
For sure,
into
no, that's right.
Yeah, there are a lot of. There's a woman, I think Layla McElwain or something. Her name is. She seeks to expose a lot of the
abuse.
Yeah, the abuse that goes on within the industry.
Yeah.
Oftentimes underage people, or sometimes someone in need of money,
and
they say, "Okay, you'll be doing some modeling." And they say, "Well, the modeling has to be naked, but don't worry, it's only going to be shown like in." Middle Eastern countries. So nothing in America. Sign a piece of paper that gives them full rights. Next thing they know, their videos are everywhere and they can't do anything about taking it down. So I'm saying the industry is fed in very unhealthy ways, and being consumer of that, you do actually feed the industry and feed the demand and stuff like that. So there's some problems with porn outside of that, but I'm saying the idea of sex and intimacy being together could theoretically include pornography or
I think that's a very nuanced take, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great take. One question. As far as being married, was there a sense ever of distrust, like most addicts, right? Especially with sex addicts in general. That's why I asked you earlier if sex and porn are different, because this might answer my question, but I was going to ask you, and you could tell me if there's a difference. Is there a lack of, I know with sex addicts, there's a tremendous distrust that automatically is built into the marriage, especially if there's actual cheating, right, going on that is extremely difficult to come back from in a marriage, obviously, if there's real cheating going on. Does that exist when you have a porn addiction?
I think it depends on the person. Some women I've heard kind of minimize it and say, okay, no big deal. I have a friend that I got to in recovery. His wife said, if you watch porn one more time, I'm out.
Wow.
So that's a personal, it's like anything else, a personal relationship. Right?
Right.
Is it a deal breaker if you don't keep Shabbos? Depends who you're married to.
Right.
Right.
Wait, that guy was in recovery?
Who are they cheating on? It's not cheating on the world.
He was in recovery trying to stop porn addiction.
He was in recovery.
Trying to stop his porn addiction.
He had stopped his porn addiction, but he had told
And he
me.
relapsed.
No, he didn't relapse. His wife had said to him, if you ever relapse on porn, even one time, I'm out.
She's not being a good wife.
Why?
I'm willing to stand and die in that.
Why?
Because
what about if someone cheated and has a sex addiction and they cheat on their wife?
First of all, okay, thank you. Porn is not cheating. That's A. B.
That's your opinion, but
that's my opinion. This is my opinion. That I feel very strongly about this. If someone is trying their hardest to fight something that, let's be honest, no woman understands this.
So let's say cheating. It's the same example.
Oh, I'm not saying.
Why is cheating any different? Hold on.
I'm not saying that he was sober for 3 years and his wife said to him that day when he came over the dinner table, "Oh, if you watch porn again, I'm out." When it was found out that he was watching pornography and he started getting healthy, his wife said, "I view this as cheating. And I'm just letting you know that I cannot be in a relationship with anyone who's watching pornography. And even if it's one time, I don't think I can."
That's what I'm saying. There's a lack of trust. It's just like cheating. It's the same concept. You could think it's not cheating.
And
her feelings are valid. I just wouldn't necessarily
marry that person. It's not for you.
I want to marry that person. Yeah, I'm saying she might have to take a long look in the mirror.
I definitely know people. No, I don't think that's necessarily even true.
That's my opinion.
Okay, I hear you. That's fair. I'm just saying. I know a lot of people, for example, right, that their husbands.
I don't know why, but this particular thing upsets me. And maybe I have a lack of empathy and I'm not seeing it from their point of view. But it's first of all, it's always a woman. It's never the man. It's a woman. You never hear.
Can I ask you a question for a second? If a guy cheats on his wife and the wife says, "If you do this one more time," after he goes to therapy,
fair.
Fair. So you're just saying you don't see how there could be a similarity.
You don't have a prostitute living in your pocket.
But how do you not see the same idea and concept that it's sex? It's
Ellie, how do you see this?
So you're not married, right?
No, how could you tell?
What?
Is it my natural glow?
So I think likely you don't trust yourself to stay away from pornography.
No, severe distrust.
What?
No, I've never been addicted, but I've always come back to it.
Right. So I'm saying you don't
as
trust
have 99%
yourself.
of men I know.
So when you hear that as a rejection of you.
Yeah.
Right.
And also a certain unkindness, almost like my standards preclude you being a human making human mistakes.
Listen, I understand what you're saying. You know, I told my wife before we got married, because I got sober before I got married, but there were things that I did with other people and with pornography after we started dating, you know, and in my mind, I convinced myself I wasn't, but at that specific time that I did something. But all that aside, she definitely felt cheated on and betrayed and everything else. Before we got married, the conversation wasn't from her to me saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, I'm out. What I said is, listen, I'm going to do my best. And I'm not saying this as an excuse. I'm just saying this as someone who recognizes that I'm an addict and a certain level of stress can bring me to the place that I act out sexually. And I recognize that for you, it feels like cheating. That's what it feels like to you. To me, it feels like no different than drinking alcohol does to an alcoholic. It happens to be sexuality, but it doesn't need to feel like it's cheating on you. For me, it wasn't like a deal. I didn't say it in this way, but for me, I'm saying likely at some point, if we get married, at some point, likely I'm going to slip, whatever that means. And in fact, I did slip on pornography about a year ago or so. And I was sober for a bunch of years prior. I said, likely I will slip. And it's possible that it could have been, when I was saying it also possible to be in other ways. However, right, there were certain parameters that we said. If something happens, that I let her know about it right away. And if she asked me questions, that I'm honest with her. So for her definition of trust was, if something happens, don't lie to me. Like that would be a major breach of trust for my wife. That would be huge. But she's able to accept something for her. So I think this is a personal decision that people make. It's their relationship, and what one person can handle is not the same as another person can handle.
Right.
And that's true. Everything is case by case basis, and I wouldn't invalidate anyone's. Like, I obviously can see why that feels like a real betrayal.
I would never survive that marriage either, by the way. I would be like, I'm out. But I'm just being honest. Yeah. I'm just saying I can understand that.
Let's be honest. I mean, you would not survive a lot of marriages.
True. I'm just saying women don't want men looking at other women like from a sexual standpoint. They feel cheated on. That's a very, very strong insecurity of them.
I don't even want to say it's women and men.
Honestly, I think in this regard, men are much less tolerant than women. I know a lot of women who got over their husbands or boyfriends cheating on them. I don't know a lot of men who have.
Because it's the male ego is much more fragile around this thing.
I can't see myself getting over that.
Yeah.
I can't even see myself wanting to get over that.
Right.
That's some honesty.
Why do you think that is?
It could be, like you said, the male ego. You know, I remember several years ago speaking to, he was like an older gentleman. He was in his 80s. Like, he ended up passing a couple years later. And he spoke about the fact that 30 years before, his wife prior to the one he has now cheated on him. And the pain was so real and so alive. And it was at the time that I was in recovery. And I was like, wow, so many guys I knew had cheated on their wife and they reconciled. And here's a guy who 30 years before, and now he's in a new marriage. Talking about, he spoke about it with such pain. And I think for men, it's a little bit harder when their wife or girlfriend cheats on them.
I don't nature factor, honestly, there.
It could be like we like evolved, like, I assume you, actually, I don't even know. I was going to say like we would like murder someone back like when we were like cavemen, but I think when we were cavemen, none was monogamous anyways.
I have a theory on this, but.
Are you sure? Don't be scared. Don't be scared.
Let's go.
Ellie, you're a courageous guy. You told the whole world.
But it's just a theory.
Just a theory.
Sometimes
we're going to obviously
make
crop
it, and the suggestion is like, this is my opinion. It's just a thought.
Oh, for sure we're going to do that.
Yeah, we're going to make you look as horrible as possible.
I don't think most women have a problem with their husbands or boyfriend cheating because of like their husband was with someone else, as much as it is that with other women, now they're a lower status.
I'm sorry. Say it again. I didn't catch it. With other women.
With
other women, they are lower status.
They're lower status.
Peterson says this, right?
I don't know. If
say it again. Say what you said one more time.
So women today don't accept that as a rule that there are open relationships and things like that, but don't accept that their man is with someone else.
Okay.
Right? But there were societies through history where people had multiple wives.
Yes.
Okay, so what were women's nature fundamentally different? What changed? Okay. And I think what changed is that women are very status conscious. And for a woman to be around a group of friends and all of them are with a man who is faithful to them and one of them isn't, she'll feel lower status around them. And that's what they don't like.
That's interesting. Because I just feel like men would feel exactly the same. Like if I'm hanging out with the boys and it's like the boys all have faithful wives and I don't, like I can imagine that it's insane pain.
But I think that's more natural to a man because what kind of doesn't work? If you're sleeping with a woman and someone else is sleeping, whose kid is it?
Right. It's evolutionary psychology stuff.
I'm saying it makes sense. It makes sense that a man would be one woman and a woman not necessarily so. But today it does feel very painful to women. But I think some of that is driven by status more than.
It's a good theory. We're gonna get you canceled for it, but it's a good theory. No, I want to really step off because you're Eli Nash and you're this is what you talk about. You talk about sex abuse and you talk about pornography and you talk about healing and ayahuasca. But there's probably other sides to Eli Nash. And I looked through a lot of your clips and you stay pretty on brand, but what else? Obviously money also, you're a businessman and I'm sure you have a lot to talk about that, but what is something that people don't know about you that drives you, that you're passionate about? What else are you about?
So yes, I've spoken a lot about porn addiction and sex abuse, but I actually don't talk about that as much.
Mm.
I usually do talk about where I just was. Whatever I was just working on, at some point in time, there's this feeling that bubbles up inside me and saying, okay, I got to share it. So
I'm sorry for mischaracterizing you then.
yeah. So for a while that was child sex abuse, and I spoke about that story, and then porn addiction, but I actually don't talk about porn addiction that much. Today I talk about healing and growth. And right now my main area of focus in healing and growth, because I feel like that's always there. My main area is my relationship. And as I start to work things out in the relationship between my wife and I started to dabble and share a little bit about that. And probably over the coming 3-6 months, I'll share a lot more of those things. Obviously, this is very different because I'm bringing another person into my stories.
Right.
So I have to see that my wife is comfortable, or she just has to not listen to the podcast and interviews.
And just feel uncomfortable wherever she is outside of it.
What?
No, I was joking. I was saying, or feel uncomfortable outside.
And that could be something. And that
She
could be
walks,
something
like,
for us to work on.
self-conscious. Hey, someone's looking at me.
And that could be something for us to work on.
No, I know, it's great. Are you at the place of your life right now where you only really care to make money just to, there's a point where you want to make a lot of money because you want to make money. And there's a point where like you only want to make money just to further your impact in the world, right? Just so you give yourself the opportunity of being able to, I don't know, give tzedakah and, do this podcast that you're able to afford and just kind of live your life. Are you at that place, or there's still like an ambition? Like, no, I'm not at the place where I just want to I'm done actually caring about the money and it's about like other things, which is fine if it is. I'm just curious. I'm
not 100% sure. I was speaking to someone a few years ago and I said, I kind of feel like I'm losing my motivation around money. He said, well, give it all away and you'll find your motivation.
No, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, once you have what you need, some people are obsessed with making money. They just want to see 100 million in the bank. And I've always been under the impression personally, where I'm like, if you write me a check that says I can go after my goals and dreams, like money's just, as we were saying.
Money's a tool.
It's like an yeshiva term. It's just a way to get me there. It's like, I don't actually care about the money. So I'm curious like how you see it.
Right. So I gave up on that a long time ago. My original drive when 18, 19, 20, when I started, coming into my own, the first thing I thought was, hey, if I make money, I'm going to find happiness. And fortunately, in my young 20s, I made what was considered money for someone, young 20s, and it didn't feed the craving at all.
Right.
Like whatever I was looking for. And where most people go and say, the problem was it wasn't enough. Had it been another zero, had it been twice as much, then maybe it would have felt better. So then they start to chase. I said, hey, there's obviously not something here. This is an empty pit. And yes, money is very important. And there's a lot of, it's not only impact, it's also the lifestyle I want to live. And it's also the way I want to raise my kids and the freedom and independence that money provides. I don't want to lose that. Of course not. But so it's more than just the impact. I'm not that altruistic. I also want to walk into a grocery store and not obsess over whether eggs are. No,
that's the same thing. That's what I'm referring to. That's having your needs taken care of. Okay, fine.
But those aren't needs.
Huh?
Those aren't needs.
Those are wants.
Those are wants.
What, being able to walk into a grocery store and buy without looking at every price tag?
Yeah,
correct.
That is a want.
Okay. I guess you can say that.
You'd be surprised how many millions of people live with
Most
that.
people don't do that, right? But I'm saying I don't want to lose that either. It's not just the impact. I don't want to lose that either.
Right.
So there's definitely those aspects of it, but I'm no longer confused by money in the way that I think it'll answer all my. It's a solve for all my problems.
I see. I preempted this whole thing by never having made money, and that way I preempted it because I know it's not going to make me happy.
In fact, he doesn't want to make any money because he knows that it's not going to help him. Anyways, all right.
We're good.
Yeah, I think we're good. We've been going for
honestly. I feel like you're one of those people that if we had all the time in the world, like I could talk to you for the next 6 hours. I think Label feels the same way too. Like, you have a lot to give.
Chat. Can I end on one thing with this ayahuasca, with the religious thing? There's something sitting.
Sure. And on multiple things.
So with the whole religious thing, I feel like someone listening to it, did we advise people not to? Did we advise people to? So a rabbi once asked me saying, hey, I've seen different people. He's open to plant medicines and people who need to go in that way. And he said, I've seen some people, like myself, who've worked with plant medicines, ayahuasca, and become more observant. Like, for example, quite literally, I had an ayahuasca experience when ayahuasca asked me, I felt like ayahuasca asked me, do you want to see Shabbos?
See Shabbos.
See Shabbos. Do you want to see Shabbos? And I said, yes. and I got dragged into this portal that felt, for lack of a better word, majestic. 2 months later, I started keeping Shabbos. It was never it wasn't an exact decision from them. It just felt right. And when I say started keeping Shabbos, I started doing much more toward Shabbos. No more phone, no more driving, no working, no anything else. I've learned that keeping Shabbos has many, many levels. You're not even allowed to like talk about extraneous subjects on Shabbos. So it's a tough term to use, but I'm much more careful around Shabbos because, in large part, probably because of that experience. So what the rabbi asked me is, I've seen that with several people, but I've seen others who've become less so. Why is that? And what I answered was, it depends where it's coming from. It depends where their religion is coming from. I remember a friend of mine who was very obsessive with religion, was just nutty about it. He was always talking about it in this and judgmental of others who didn't do it a certain way, had an ayahuasca experience and came out and said, Judaism is for fools.
Right.
And I was like, that's not, so I shared like some of my experience.
Your
I
Judaism.
said, exactly. I said, your Judaism, the way you were practicing, was being practiced by a fool. That's what I was telling you. It didn't tell you about mine. I've never got clarity around other people's stuff. And the fact of the matter is that many people of different religions, right, find a shaman I spoke to once said this. He said he's worked with Jewish people, Christians, Muslims, and he said he'll find that some people get closer and some people don't, because the message is this furthering your life or is this taking away from you in that way? And I think that as rabbis and Jewish leaders, that one thing they can do is feel a little more secure about the product that they're offering. If Judaism has everything you say it has, let someone step aside. Don't be so afraid if someone tries Pepsi, they're not going to come back to Coca-Cola. If it has everything, if someone needs to go there for their search, what did it say? Kairach went through, tested all the religions, then came to Judaism. If that's the path someone needs to take, especially if you see them struggling and anxious and depressed and lifeless, allow them. And I think that ayahuasca understands that. All it's trying to do is clean someone out. All it's trying to do is get rid of the parts that are not working for that person. And sometimes that can mean more, and sometimes that can mean less. But over time, this same person the whole Judaism for fools, now he's 10, 15 ayahuasca ceremonies later, and this guy's much more Jewish than I've ever known him to be.
Yeah, a lot of people come back. I mean, this is similar to like in general therapy. People, especially that grow up with a lot of religious trauma, walk away from religion. And the parents are always upset. How could this be the right thing? And this is an old school thought for a long time. And they come back to religion in a very different way than what they were originally doing it from a much more healthy perspective. And they take 5-10 years off and figure out their life and go through their journey. And then they circle back. And I think like you're describing a little bit, like, you know, they're much more frum than they ever were. And they don't look more frum, but they are.
Right. In many more ways, it's more passionate. It's more real. It's been tried. It's been tested. We know it'll do. We know it will do under fire. Yeah. Right. They want it. And I think within Judaism, they say, like, don't go down that path to find the strength that it will give you. But if you have, then it actually is going to give you a certain level of strength.
100%. Wow, Eli, thank you so much. I know, you know something, I was talking to you for the last month and you were like, we got to do this. I told you the next time we're in Miami, we're going to do this. Sure enough, we made it happen and I really appreciate it.
A question for you?
Yeah, of course.
What is the thesis? What is I probably should ask at the beginning of your podcast.
Sure.
I've watched a number of different ones. I think Yom and Temp for Anthony Scaramucci connected.
I don't know what answer he's going to give, but I do think ours is in a bit of flux.
Oh, maybe what, mine and yours is different?
No, I think the podcast itself is kind of, we are still sort of defining ourselves and what our
I'm not really defining. For me, I'm not, honestly. I am a little bit. I'm not, I can give you the answer in one basic sentence. I'm a person that very much enjoys speaking to people much wiser than me and much more worked through than me. And I also love hearing human experiences. So I'm passionate about those specific things. And I think talking with people that have experiences that I don't, since everyone's experience and perception of life is different, I think is uber important. And dialogue is super important. And empathy and understanding the next person's experience is super important. And learning from people who know a lot more than me is super important. That is the context of my podcast and the thesis of it. And I also, with all that and being someone who's a very ambitious person, I like to have a lot of fun. So I'll also, as you can see, we're always quipping, we're always joking because we're regular, normal dudes that are with it. We'll chop it up, but we're also going to have a very serious conversation with a very smart person. That's the thesis of my podcast in under 90 seconds.
So a lot of it's personal to you. You feel you get more to life by having this.
100%. I don't do anything that costs me $100,000+ a year and makes no money if I didn't feel it has some benefit to me.
Why is it so expensive to do a podcast? I
We
never
can
do
explain
going
that.
in.
I was talking with your producer that like you're in the podcast game. I don't think any of us realize getting into this just how much work and money and effort this takes.
So that someone can be in a car ride
And
be a
turn
little
you
more
off to listen to the radio.
No, it's good.
Who was it
Hopefully-
that said it? It was someone that said like, I'm trying to remember, but the YouTube ads that come up when you're watching YouTube,
Yeah.
we just like press skip ad.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, someone just worked for 6 fucking weeks on that ad, and like within 3 seconds, like those fucking thing out of her. Yeah, but anyways,
We don't take it for granted. We're very grateful to have an audience. You must be incredible. I mean, 5 million plus views, TED Talk.
on the TED Talk, yeah.
That-
Yeah,
That's pretty
that's
well.
we having an audience is not something to take for granted. It's not something to take lightly. It's a beautiful thing.
Do you think, by the way, I explained the thesis? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, that's why I parroted it back. Is it sounds like very much like for your own journey, you feel like this would be more fulfilling.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. I mean, I still work, or I attempt to, but
Right, I understand, but
this is something I try to do. I enjoy it. I also thoroughly enjoy it.
I'm
me
in it
too.
for the free shit.
I do as well. What?
I'm in it for the free shit. Someone gave me a hoodie to wear on air, and like I didn't have to pay for it. Like that's mostly what I'm here for.
He's going for the merch.
I'm here for merch. Yeah.
I focus much better for whatever reason with the microphone in front of me. I started doing these, Rabbi Shay's Taub?
Yes. Oh my gosh,
Sure.
his name keeps. I'm in touch with him to try to bring him on here. Honestly, Rabbi, I've been trying, waiting for your response.
Real talk. Why are
Okay, I'll say
Chabad
this.
Jews so much better than other Jews? You guys are also cool.
So Shays and I have a very nice relationship. We've done a number of podcasts, and we spoke at one point about learning like a sicha, Rebbe sicha, together. So we do that on air, but really it's for me to learn. Like if
Right.
anyone benefits, I find that I learn it,
Yeah.
and then I get to talk to him, and I get like a one-on-one
Right.
chavrusa with Shays for 2 hours
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
a sicha. It's freaking awesome.
Label, how many times have I
It's the
said
same exact thing. We just sat down with whatever.
having a podcast is an excuse to have the sort of conversations that our busy, frantic lives in the modern world we never get to have.
Yeah.
How often do you get to sit down and have a focused, present conversation with someone? You got to start a podcast. It's the only way. It's worth the $100,000. You got to do it.
I agree.
All right,
Okay,
guys.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I appreciate it greatly.